I had never paid much attention to the attic of our house. It was just above the corridor of the rooms, with a small hatch on the ceiling and a simple lock on the outside. It was more of a rubble space, used only to store old boxes. Until that night, the only time we opened that was when my father needed to get something or check the roof. But that morning, I woke up with a sound that made my stomach freeze. Slow, dragged steps, as if someone was walking up there. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was some kind of animal. But the sound was too heavy to be a mouse or a raccoon. It was the kind of step you feel on the floor, you know? A slow creaking, then silence, then another creaking. The strangest thing is that the access was locked. I myself had seen my father put the padlock that afternoon. With each step I heard, the certainty that we were not alone grew, and fear began to take over. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks. But when I was about to lie down again, I heard something else, a long scratch, like nails scraping on the wooden floor from up there. My heart raced. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise, and went to the door of my room. The corridor was in the dark, and the sound seemed louder when I got close to the attic hatch. There was no wind, no rain, nothing that justified that. I went to my parents' room, knocking lightly on the door. My father opened it with a sleepy face, but before I said anything, a dry nod, "Can't echoed from up there. He looked at me, frowned, and walked to the corridor. He took a chair, climbed, and pulled the padlock. It was closed, exactly as we had left it. Still, you could clearly hear the weight of steps moving in the dark above us. He closed the lock again and made me go back to the room, trying to reassure me, but I realized that he himself was tense. We were silent for a while, and the steps stopped, at least for a few minutes. When I started to think it was over, I heard a heavier sound, as if something had been knocked down there in the attic. My father got up again, this time taking a flashlight, and climbed the folding ladder to take a look. He lit up the space quickly and found nothing but old boxes and dust. We tried to sleep after that, but around 3 in the morning, the noise came back, only closer, as if it were just above our rooms. I stood still, lying down, listening to each slow and dragged step. So, without warning, the sound stopped. That's when I heard something much worse, a long and heavy sigh, as if someone was bending down near the point where the ceiling met the wall. I didn't sleep anymore that night, and to this day, when I remember, it gives me the feeling that it wasn't someone entering. It was someone who was already there before. The next morning, my father went up again to check more calmly. He pushed some boxes to the side and realized that there was accumulated dust, except in a strip, as if someone had passed by there several times. This clean dust trail led to the corner of the attic, where, leaning against the wall, there was a small aluminum staircase. We've never had that ladder. He went down without saying a word and locked the attic door again, this time putting an extra lock. During the day, nothing happened. But that same night, while I was trying to sleep, I heard the sound of the padlock turning slowly. My room was completely cold, and I felt paralyzed. The sound of footsteps came back, now going down the stairs. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in the morning with everything apparently normal. My father didn't say anything, and I didn't have the courage to ask either. The detail that left me on alert was that, when passing through the corridor, I realized that the folding ladder was open, and the padlock hanging unlocked. To this day I don't know who, or what was up there. The only thing I know is that the attic was never used again, and whenever I think about it, I wonder, what if that person had never left? And you? If you heard footsteps in the attic at dawn, would you have the courage to go up to check, or leave it there? When I woke up that morning, I was still a little sleepy, but I noticed a folded paper stuck between the back door and the stop. I found it strange because we never received anything there, and for someone to put that there, they would have to enter the backyard. When I opened it, I realized that it was a note written with a children's handwriting, crooked and unequal letters. At first, I thought it was some neighbor joke, until I read the content. The text described very specific things. My dog's name, the time my mother usually gets home from work, the fact that we leave the kitchen window open at night. At the end, there was a sentence that made me freeze. "I see you sleeping." I didn't have a signature, but there was a small drawing of a house with 4 windows and an X on one of them, exactly the window of my room. At the time, my whole body frosted. The first thing I thought of was cameras, but we don't have any facing the backyard. I looked around, looking for any sign of burglary or footprints, but the floor was dry and there were no visible marks. Even so, the feeling of being observed was suffocating. I locked the door, closed all the windows, and went to wake up my mother. She turned pale when she read the note, and said she had never seen that letter before. We decided to call the police, but while we waited, I kept trying to understand how someone knew those details. Some could only be perceived being inside our house, or watching very closely for a long time. This reminded me of a night, a couple of weeks before, when I heard noises coming from the backyard, but I thought it was some animal. At that moment, I began to think that maybe that had been happening for a long time. While we were waiting for the car, I found myself looking at every corner of the house, trying to imagine from where that person could have watched us. I couldn't help but go to the backyard again, even with the fear. When I got close to the fence, I noticed something that had gone unnoticed before. The side gate, which we always leave locked, was just leaning. There were no signs of burglary, but it was impossible for it to have opened it alone. That gave me the feeling that whoever left the note had gone in and out there, maybe more than once. When the police arrived, they collected the ticket and asked if we had recent suspects or disagreements. There was no one who fit in. They said they would keep an eye on the area, but, in practice, it seemed that there was not much to do. After they left, we spent the whole day on alert, with every little noise sounding like a warning. At night, before going to sleep, I found myself thinking, what if this person hadn't just left a note? What if she was still around, waiting for the right moment to enter again? That night, we tried to sleep, but any different sound made my heart race. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a slight click coming from the direction of the backyard. I got up slowly and went to the window, trying to see something. I didn't see anyone, but I noticed a piece of paper stuck in the fence, swinging with the wind. I waited for Dawn to go there, and it was another note, short, with only 3 words. "I'll be back soon." The police were called again, but, like the first time, there were no cameras at the exact point where the paper appeared. They recommended strengthening the locks and installing a more complete monitoring system. Since then, I have lived with the constant feeling that someone is watching us. We never found another note again, but the silence now seems even more disturbing, because I will never know if the threat is over or if it is just waiting. On the first night, I thought it was a coincidence. The backyard movement lights turned on about 3 times between midnight and 2 in the morning. I went to the window, looked quickly, but I didn't see anything. I thought it could be some neighborhood cat or even a branch moving with the wind. But that week, it wasn't windy. And even so, every night, the pattern repeated itself, always around the same time, always lighting up in sequence, as if someone was walking around the perimeter of the house. On the 3rd night, I decided to keep an eye on it. I turned off all the lights inside, sat in the living room, facing the backyard, and waited. At 2:17 a.m., the light on the left side turned on. 2 minutes later, the one in the background. 1 more minute, and the one on the right side. It was as if someone was slowly circulating around the house. The strangest thing is that when I got up the courage and opened the back door, the backyard was completely silent, but the light on the left side turned on again by itself behind me. The next night, I decided to test something. I left my cell phone recording facing the backyard. I put it on night mode and left it near the window, focusing on the lights and the lawn. I slept on the couch, ready to wake up if they lit up. Around 2:00 and a little, I heard that click of the sensor and opened my eyes. The background lights were on, but I didn't see anything moving. In the morning, I went to review the recording. The first few times the lights turned on, nothing appeared in the video. But, at a specific moment, I noticed something too fast to be a coincidence. A shadow crossing the farthest part of the backyard, close to the fence. I couldn't distinguish face or body, it just looked like a dark shape. But the detail that gave me the most goosebumps was that it moved slowly, almost dragging one foot after the other, exactly as the sensors had detected in recent days. The next day, I tried not to think too much about it, but curiosity spoke louder. At night, I turned off all the lights in the house and watched the backyard from the kitchen window, in absolute silence. Around 3 in the morning, the sensor turned on again. I had my vision fixed at the point where the shadow had appeared before, and that's exactly where I saw a figure appear. I couldn't identify if it was a person or not, but it had human height and posture. He stood still, as if he knew I was watching, and then slowly moved out of the field of light. When I got up the courage to open the door and look closely, there was absolutely nothing. No marks on the wet floor, no sign that someone had passed by. Just the silence of the dawn and the suffocating feeling that it wasn't over. I've been living alone since I moved into this house, a little over a year ago. It's a quiet neighborhood, one of those streets that are practically deserted at night, with few illuminated houses. I've always had the habit of checking doors and windows before going to sleep, especially the one in the garage, which gives direct access to the kitchen. That night, I did the usual. I closed everything, checked the lock of the front door and the garage gate, turned off the lights, and went to the room. It was about 11:30 p.m., and I was almost falling asleep when I heard a metallic noise, like the sound of the automatic gate engine working. At first, I thought it was some neighbor arriving late, but soon I realized that the sound came from inside my house. My heart raced at the time. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise, and went to the corridor. The engine stopped, but the silence that remained afterwards was even stranger. When I looked through the kitchen door, I saw the garage gate completely open. The street was deserted, lit only by the pole on the other side, and there was no one around. The strangest thing, the remote control was in the same place as always, on top of the refrigerator. I went back to the room without being able to relax. I took my phone and opened the security camera app. In the recordings, I clearly saw the gate starting to open by itself, but there was no movement before that, no shadow, nothing that indicated that someone had approached. Not even the street sensor was activated. I noticed that, right after the gate opened completely, the camera was a few seconds with the distorted image, as if it had lost the signal. This had never happened before. I stood still for a few minutes, just listening. There was no wind, no noise from passing cars. It was as if the whole street had been off. I decided to close the gate by the control and lock the internal door again, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I spent hours thinking about how that could have happened. The engine doesn't start by itself without someone pressing the button or using the control, and I knew there was no one with access to the signal. The next day, early in the morning, I went to check the gate and the engine. There were no signs of burglary, no cut wire, no mark indicating attempted invasion. The mechanical part was intact, as if nothing had happened. I asked the neighbor in front if he had seen anything, but he said he was up late and didn't notice any movement on the street. That made me even more intrigued, because he had a direct view of my garage. Later, I tested the remote control to see if it could be defective, but everything worked normally. I even thought about the possibility of some universal frequency control opening by coincidence, but my garage has a coded system that changes the signal with each use. It didn't make sense. The feeling that someone had somehow managed to open and close without leaving traces did not leave my head. The next night, I watched in the living room, with the lights off, looking out the window that overlooked the garage. Everything was in absolute silence, until, around 2:30 a.m., I heard the gate engine starting by itself. I quickly went to the door, but when I looked, it was already fully open, revealing the empty street, illuminated only by a pole further on. There were no cars, no steps, no wind. Just that heavy silence that seemed to fill the air. The detail that gave me the most chills was that, this time, the remote control was on the table, about 2 meters from me, and no one had touched it. I closed the gate manually, and turned off the engine to prevent it from opening again, but I spent the rest of the morning awake, waiting for any movement. Nothing else happened, but the restlessness only increased. The next morning, I checked the gate, and everything seemed normal. The engine worked perfectly, with no signs of defect, and there was no mark of forcing or attempted invasion. I talked to a neighbor who lives in front of my house, but he said he didn't see or hear anything that night. This made me even more uncomfortable, because I knew I hadn't imagined it. I was there, I saw and heard it happen. During the day, I tried to follow my routine normally, but every time I went through the garage door I felt a cold in my stomach. The feeling was that, somehow, someone or something had managed to open the gate from the inside out, without having to touch anything. And the worst part is that, even with everything locked, I couldn't feel protected inside my own house. The next night, before going to sleep, I decided to turn off the gate engine and lock it manually, just to make sure it wouldn't open by itself. I even put a piece of wood as an extra lock. I went to sleep thinking that this would give me some tranquility, but around 3 in the morning I woke up with the same metallic sound echoing through the house. I ran up, and when I got to the kitchen, I saw through the small window that the gate was open again, revealing the deserted street. The wooden lock was on the floor, intact, as if someone had simply lifted and put it aside. This time, I felt a real panic rise down my spine, because I realized that it was not a technical problem, it was intentional. I ran to close the gate as fast as I could, looking everywhere, trying to see any movement on the street, but there was no one. No cars, no neighbors, nothing. The silence was so dense that even my steps seemed too high. I stopped everything again and stayed there for a few minutes, standing, watching, trying to understand how that could be happening. I went back inside with the feeling that someone was testing my reaction, seeing how far I would go. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, facing the garage door, with all the lights off, waiting to hear any sound. But nothing else happened until dawn. To this day, I have no idea who or what did this, and I've never been able to sleep peacefully since then. On a Saturday morning, I was leaving for work when I noticed something on the doormat. It was a folded piece of paper, without any envelope. I took it thinking it was some delivery note or advertisement, but when I opened it, my stomach frore. It was a photo of my family, taken clearly from outside my house, through the living room window. I recognized the angle at the time. You could see the reflection of the curtain that only stays like that when it is half closed, exactly as I had left it the night before. What gave me the most goosebumps was realizing that no one in my family knew about this photo. My wife and children were in the image, sitting on the couch, watching TV, completely oblivious to any camera. That wasn't an old photo, because even the clothes they wore were the same as the day before. The notion that someone was there, outside, so close and long enough to record that moment, made my mind panic immediately. I went back home with the photo in my hands and locked the door immediately. I tried to stay calm so as not to scare my wife, but she noticed my pale face and asked what had happened. When I showed it, she was silent, just looking at the image. The first thing I thought of was to check the security cameras, but when accessing the system, I realized that just the night before, between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., the recordings had disappeared. There was no record of movement in front of the house in this interval, as if someone had deliberately deleted it. I called the police, but the answer was the usual. Without concrete evidence of threat, there is not much to do. They even sent a vehicle to take a look, but after a few minutes, they said there were no signs of burglary or anything that justified immediate investigation. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. I couldn't stop imagining who took that photo, and worse, how long he was watching my family without us noticing. That night, it was impossible to sleep. Every noise that came from the street or the backyard put me on alert. I kept getting out of bed every half hour to check if all the doors and windows were locked. In one of these moments, around 3 a.m., I saw through the kitchen glass a figure passing quickly through the garden, near the living room window, exactly where the photo seemed to have been taken. I ran to the back door, but when I opened it, there was no one. The silence outside was almost deafening. The next day, I noticed something even more disturbing. The photo I had kept in the desk drawer had disappeared. I asked my wife and the children, but no one had mixed. I began to wonder if the goal was not only to intimidate, but also to show that this person could enter and leave my house without being seen at any time. It was the first time I really felt vulnerable inside my own home. I spent the rest of the day looking out the window at every car noise or step on the sidewalk. I installed an app on my phone to access the cameras in real time, but this only increased the anxiety. Every time I checked, I expected to see someone standing out there, looking at the house. In the late afternoon, when I went to pick up the mail, I noticed a strange thing. The doormat was a little out of place, as if someone had lifted it and put it back. I looked down and there was nothing, but the simple fact of being different made me cold. That night, I locked all the doors with 2 turns of key and pushed the kitchen table against the front door. I stayed awake on the couch, with the lights off, trying to hear any sign of movement outside. Around 2:45 a.m., I heard a dry click, as if someone had stepped on the wood of the balcony. I approached slowly, and through the curtain slit, I saw a shadow moving away towards the street. I couldn't identify anything other than the human form, but the feeling was that the person knew exactly that I was there, watching. I waited a few minutes before opening the door, trying to gather courage. When I finally took a deep breath and looked out, I didn't see anyone on the street. But something made me lower my eyes. Right in the center of the doormat, there was a new photo. It was the same image of my family, taken through the living room window, but this time with a disturbing detail. A dark reflection on the glass, as if someone was standing inside the room at the time of the photo. That made me feel an intense cold in my spine, because at the time this photo was taken, I was alone at home. I went back inside trembling, looted the door and sat on the floor, leaning against her. I spent hours staring at the photo, trying to find some explanation that didn't involve someone having invaded the house. When the sun rose, I realized that I hadn't nailed my eye all night. I kept the photo in a drawer, but to this day I can't throw it away. It's as if I remembered that at some point someone was too close, and I never found out who it was. I was sitting on the couch, already close to midnight, with the lights in the living room off and only the TV on. That's when I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye, through the window curtain. In the penumbra of the backyard, behind the fence, there was a perfectly motionless silhouette. It was impossible to distinguish details, but you could see that it was facing the house for me. I was paralyzed, trying to decide whether to get up to turn on the lights or simply pretend I hadn't seen it. Time didn't seem to pass. That figure was still there, without moving a muscle, and I could feel the heart speeding up more and more. I tried to find the courage to pick up the phone and call the police, but when I created the strength to look again, the silhouette had disappeared. I went to the back door, still with my hands shaking, and looked out. Not even traces on the wet floor. To this day I don't know what scares me more, what I saw or the possibility that I never really left. The next night, I couldn't relax. I was constantly checking the windows, but I tried to act normally, as if it would help me stay calm. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a clap coming from the backyard, as if something had been stepped on. I ran to peek, but there was nothing visible, just the same dense darkness. Still, I had the clear feeling of being watched, as if someone was there perfectly hidden. I decided to go around, and go out the front door to see if I could find any signs. The street was deserted, silent, and the cold wind made the air heavier. When I got to the side of the house, I noticed something that froze me completely. The grass was marked by a couple of footprints, going from the fence to a darker part of the backyard, and stopping abruptly, as if the person had simply disappeared from there. I went back inside and locked all the doors, but at this point my mind was already creating horrible scenarios. I took my cell phone and sat on the sofa in the living room, trying to distract myself, but my eyes kept going to the window. After a few minutes, something moved in my peripheral vision. I looked quickly and saw, for a moment, the same silhouette standing behind the fence, exactly at the same point as the night before. I was frozen, not knowing whether to run to get something to defend myself or if I called the police immediately. When I managed to react, the figure was no longer there. I went to the window, but the backyard was completely empty. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see shadows moving away. It was as if that person had dematerialized in front of me. In the following days, I began to avoid opening the curtains at night. Still, I felt observed. Even my dog, who rarely barked, started to get restless when he got close to the fence. One night, I gathered courage and left a camera pointed at the backyard. The next day, when reviewing the recording, I saw something that made me freeze. At 2:47 a.m., a silhouette standing in exactly the same place as always, motionless for almost 5 minutes, until it slowly moved away into the dark. The strangest thing is that, from the image, the person seemed to be wearing something like a white mask, completely smooth. I didn't recognize the clothes, nor the posture, and the quality wasn't good enough to distinguish more details. But seeing that figure so close and motionless for so long made my skin shiver in a way I had never felt before. After that night, I started checking the camera every day, always hoping not to see anything. For a few mornings, there really was no apparition. But exactly a week later, the figure came back. The same place, the same motionless posture, the same time stopped looking at my house. The difference is that, this time, when he turned to leave, you could clearly see that he was carrying something long in his hand, like a piece of wood or a pipe. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept wondering what would have happened if I had gone there, or if that person decided to jump the fence. I called the police in the morning, but all I heard was that, without flagrante and without more information, they couldn't do much. Since then, every time it gets dark, I feel as if the backyard were a stage, and my house, the audience he insists on facing. That night, I was alone at home, relaxing on the couch and watching TV. It was an ordinary Tuesday, around 9 p.m., when the intercom rang. It's not very common for someone to play at night, so I've been a little alert. I picked up the phone and, before even saying anything, I heard a calm, low, almost whispered voice, saying my name, pausing for a few seconds and repeating again. It wasn't a tone of urgency, nor of someone who needed help. It seemed more calculated, as if he was studying me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to recognize that voice. It wasn't from any neighbor, nor from someone I knew. I asked, "Who's there?" But the person just repeated my name, once again with the same cold tone. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly looked through the window facing the street, but I didn't see anyone at the gate or on the sidewalk. I kept listening to the voice on the intercom until suddenly silence took over. When I went to look again, the street was completely empty. I kept trying to rationalize, telling myself that it could be some stupid teenage joke, but that didn't work. The front gate was closed, and the street where I live is very quiet. You can see anyone from afar, and there was no movement at all. I decided to take my cell phone and call a neighbor who lives right in front, asking if he had seen someone standing there. He said he looked out the window, but there was absolutely no one. At that moment, I decided to go down to the gate to check. I took a flashlight and went with caution, but what bothered me was that, even after a few minutes, the intercom was still slightly hot, as if it had been used several times in sequence. There was no ticket, nothing out of place, just the uncomfortable silence of the street at night. I went back inside with the feeling that somehow, whoever it was knew exactly that I was alone and knew my name. I went to sleep that night with my head boiling, trying to remember if I had told my name to any stranger recently, or if I had received visits from new delivery men. Nothing made sense. As much as I wanted to believe it was something random, a part of me knew it wasn't. In the following days, I became more attentive. I installed a camera near the gate, adjusted the external lights to turn on with any movement, and even changed some habits, such as leaving the TV on at night to give the impression that there were more people at home. But, until today, I never found out who was on the other side of that intercom, repeating my name in the middle of the night as if they already knew me. The morning this happened, I woke up like any other day, still a little sleepy and trying to remember if it was Monday or Tuesday. I was alone at home, so my routine was always the same. Get up, prepare a coffee, and only then open the curtains and windows. But when I entered the room again to get a shirt, something stuck me in place. The window was open. Not only unlocked, but fully open. I perfectly remember having it closed and locked before bed, because I have a habit of checking it 2 or 3 times before going to bed. I stood still for a few seconds, facing that, trying to create a logical explanation. Maybe I'd left it barely closed. Maybe the wind had forced. But there was no strong wind that night, and even so, the lock only opens from the inside. I approached carefully, and the cold morning air came in, along with that strange silence that makes us hear even our own heart beating. That's when I realized a detail that made me cold. The pair of slippers that I always leave lined up next to the bed was crossed, as if someone had stumbled on it in the dark. I took a deep breath and began to search the room with my eyes, trying to notice any other detail out of place. On the desk, a picture frame was facing down. I never leave anything out of position there. There seemed to be no signs of theft. Nothing had disappeared, at least nothing I noticed, but the feeling that someone was there while I slept was almost unbearable. I looked at the floor near the window and noticed small marks, such as shoe-sole dirt, dry, forming a path towards the bedroom door. I followed these marks to the corridor, but they suddenly stood before reaching the room. It was as if the person had worried about not leaving a trace after that point. I went to the kitchen to check the back door, and it was closed, locked as always. I went back to the room and kept looking at the open window, feeling my stomach turn. I didn't know if that had ended there, or if the person who came in could come back that same night. The first thing I did was take my cell phone and check the security cameras. I have one installed in the living room and another in the backyard, but none in the bedroom. Reviewing the early morning recordings, I noticed that at 3:17 a.m. the room camera recorded a brief shadow movement in the corridor, too fast to identify, but clearly human. The worst thing is that there was no record of anyone entering or leaving through the main or back door. I thought about calling the police, but I wondered what I would say. Someone entered my room and opened my window, but didn't take anything? They would probably just make a record and leave, and that wouldn't give me any real sense of security. So that morning I locked the window, closed the curtains, and spent the rest of the day trying not to think about what would happen when the night came. The next night, I left all the external lights on and put a chair leaning against the bedroom door, like an improvised barrier. I couldn't sleep well. At every slightest noise, I got up to check. Around 2:50 a.m., I heard a slight click coming from the direction of the window, the unmistakable sound of a lock being moved. My heart raced. I walked slowly to the window, trying to make as little noise as possible. Before I could get close, I saw the doorknob move by itself and the window begin to open, very slowly, as if someone outside was testing if I was awake. I ran to her and locked her tightly, but I didn't have the courage to look outside. The next morning, I noticed footprints on the wet earth just below the window. They were fresh, large prints and looked like men's shoes. I followed the marks for a few meters until they simply disappeared on the lawn, as if the person had returned the same way with calculated steps. From that day on, I started checking all the doors and windows several times before going to sleep. Still, the feeling that someone already knew my habits and was just waiting for the right moment never went away. To this day, I have no idea who tried to enter or if they will ever try again. When I woke up that morning, the first thing I noticed was that the back door was locked, as always. But when I opened the kitchen curtain, I saw a pile of my clothes carefully folded in the backyard. They were t-shirts, pants, and even a jacket that I remembered leaving inside the closet in the bedroom. The pile was perfectly aligned, as if someone had made a point of organizing it there. I was paralyzed, trying to understand how that could have happened. There were no signs of burglary, no open windows, nothing out of place inside the house, except for the clothes that were now outside. The feeling that someone was walking through my rooms while I was sleeping made me nauseous. I couldn't convince myself that it could have a simple explanation. I went out to the backyard with my heart racing, looking around to see if there were footprints or any sign of where the person entered or left. The ground was a little wet from the serene, and there were no visible marks, as if the pile had simply appeared there. I took the clothes and checked one by one. Nothing was missing, but the fact that they were perfectly folded bothered me more than if they were played. It was an intentional gesture, almost as if it was to show me that the person had time and calm to do that inside my house. I collected everything and went back inside, trying to remember if I had left any window open or unlocked door the night before. I went through the whole house and everything was locked, just like I usually do before going to sleep. This made me even more nervous, because if someone really was there, they didn't leave any sign of entry. The rest of the day was strange. I kept looking at the walls at the corners, trying to imagine someone moving through my space while I slept. With every noise from the street, I went to the window, and the feeling that remained was that the pile of clothes in the backyard was not just a strange joke. It was a warning. When I put the clothes away, I realized that some were folded in a way that I never do, as if someone else had put their hands on them carefully. It gave me a chill down my spine. Whoever did this was not in a hurry. He seemed to have time to stay there, fiddling with my things. That night, I had a hard time falling asleep. I left the backyard lights on and checked the cameras twice before going to bed. But deep down, knowing that someone could have entered without leaving a trace was worse than any alarm triggered. Until today, I haven't found out who did this or how he got in. I remember that the first time I heard it, I thought it was something in my head. It was a low, constant whistle coming from the backyard. The kind of sound someone would make to call a dog or warn that it was there, but it didn't seem random. It was repetitive, always at the same rhythm, like a kind of sign. I looked out the window, nothing. I waited a few minutes, and the sound stopped out of nowhere. I was restless, but I tried to forget. The next night, at the same time, the sound returned. This time, I went straight to the back door and turned on the outside lights. As soon as the light turned on, absolute silence. I waited a few minutes, my heart racing, but nothing happened. I went back inside trying to convince myself that it was a coincidence. But when it happened for the third time, I realized it was not a coincidence. On the third night, I was already prepared. I sat in the living room, near the glass door, with the lights off, waiting for that time. When the whistle began, it seemed even closer, as if it came from behind the fence, almost glued to the backyard. It was impossible to see anything outside, but the sound was so clear that it looked like the person was looking straight at my window. There was no sound of footsteps, nothing but that constant and slow whistle. I took my cell phone and started recording the audio. I wish I had some proof to show someone, because I was already starting to doubt myself. When I finally found the courage to open the door and take a step outside, the sound stopped at once, as if they had pressed a button. I stood still, listening only to the distant noise of the street, but the feeling that there was someone watching me there, in the dark, did not let me breathe properly. The next night, I decided to try something different. I turned off all the lights and stayed in my room, with the window ajar waiting. When the whistle began, this time it seemed to come from another point in the backyard, further away. But the rhythm was the same, almost as if it were a rehearsed music. I could swear that the melody was identical to one that my father used to hum when I was a child, and it gave me a chill that made me freeze. I took a flashlight and, without making noise, walked to the kitchen to go out the back door. The idea was to suddenly illuminate and catch whoever was there by surprise. But as soon as I put my hand on the handle, the whistle stopped in the same second. Absolute silence. I opened the door and lit every corner of the backyard. There was nothing. But on the wooden fence, there was a scratch made the pocket knife, for vertical lines and a diagonal cutting, like a counting mark. I went back inside trying to ignore the knot in my stomach, but I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept thinking about those marks on the fence, as if someone was literally counting the days. The next morning, I went to look again and realized that they were deeper than I imagined, as if they had been made very hard, and the wood around was slightly chipped. The night that followed, the whistle returned. Same time, same rhythm. But this time, instead of coming from a fixed point, it seemed to move slowly through the backyard. I followed the sound through the window until I noticed that it stopped exactly in the direction of the back door. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't see a shadow, but I had the clear impression that someone was standing there just waiting. On the third night, I decided I wouldn't let it go anymore. I put my cell phone to record audio and left it in the window facing the backyard, hoping to capture the sound. When the whistle started, I felt a cold go up my spine. He was taller, closer, almost as if the person was right behind the glass. When I finally got the courage to look, I didn't see anyone. But, curiously, the recording stopped by itself at the exact moment when the sound became more intense. When playing, I realized that in the last seconds there was something strange. A heavy breath, too close to the microphone, as if someone had noticed the cell phone and blew on it before stopping the recording. The next night, I decided to stay in the backyard before the time when the whistle usually started. I sat in the dark, trying not to make noise. As the time approached, the air seemed to get heavier and the silence suffocating. Then, right behind me, the sound began, not coming from far away, but practically next to me. I turned around immediately, but there was nothing. Not a movement on the grass, not a shadow, nothing. But minutes later, when I entered the house, I noticed something that made me freeze. The back door was leaning. I was absolutely sure that I had locked it before leaving.